The Parsha.
Yeah, except I can't pull up my screen share, Ashley. You're going to have to make an
Lech Lecha.
adjustment. It says host disabled participant screen sharing. Okay, now we're cooking or looking or something. Okay, so here we are in the middle of Parshat Lech Lecha, and we get what is sometimes referred to in our tradition as Brit Bein Habatarim, the covenant between the pieces, which comes a little bit later in chapter 15. God makes another covenant with Abraham. He's still Avram at this point. And this is the beginning. God comes to Avram in a vision. Doesn't say what God looks like in this vision, but okay. The word of the Lord came to Avram in a vision, and he said, "Fear not, Avram, I am a shield to you. Your reward will be very great." Avram is not moved by this because he knows what he really wants. He says, I need children, and I don't have any. The guy in charge of my household will be my heir. And God says, not going to happen that way. Right? Your heir will come from you. Right? This is before even Ishmael comes along, let alone Isaac. Right? God takes him outside and says, count the stars if you can. That's how many your offspring will be. And because, and this is kind of a vague verse, but we'll come to it. Because he put his trust in the Lord, he reckoned it to his merit. Yes, Ann?
Two things. One is that I always hear the Christians saying that shows that faith is what really counts.
There you go. And if you look at the very next piece I have here, right, that's a Christian commentary written not in the medieval period, but 1980. And it says this is one of the most significant verses of Scripture, response of faith, and quotes their own Scripture to teach that, as in Avram's case, our standing before God is entirely dependent on faith. We cannot win a place in heaven by good deeds. Neither did he. So says this Christian commentary. Anne, you're begging to say something.
The other comment I have is just the opposite. You know Dr. Footnick? He teaches
I know of him. I've never been in his class.
Well, there's something compelling about the way he teaches. But last time I was in his class, he said something that kind of shocked me. He said, why is Abraham expressing this disbelief? He said, what can you give me? He should have had faith that God would give him children. He's an old man now. And I was really shocked to hear this Jew claiming that Abraham lacked faith. That I know.
Well, at some point, Abram did lack faith, and it was only by the growth of his faith that we progressed, and he progressed on to inherit all of the stuff that he eventually did. And it was the lack of faith that caused the Israelites problems in the desert. So faith is something it
counts.
It counts, and you've got to really and truly believe and have strong faith, because adversity, you're going to give it up, and then you begin to doubt and you have problems.
Well, right. It depends on what it is you're, and hold on a second. It depends on what it is you're having faith in. If you're having faith that there's going to be manna in the desert, that might have been fine back then. Right? Today, not so much. right? So
But Hashem
I
says
think
right
most
away,
commentators would agree with you, Barbara, that uh, Abraham didn't always have faith, but he grew in faith. And that's, and of course, so why does God pick Abraham in the first place? The answer is he sees the guy has potential.
but
Right?
Abraham did what God told him to do. He not only had belief, he had actions. And God told him to do things, and he did them.
Dell?
Well, at this point, God has told Abraham to go to Canaan and blah, 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 blah. And Abraham has done it. And God had promised Abraham children, and it's been a long time, and Abraham hasn't seen God deliver.
That's right.
Yeah.
So, how much faith do you expect a person to have?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, logically, and Abraham is being very logical. He says, I wanted kids, but I'm not having any. Doesn't look like it.
He doesn't care
But
about the world.
in
He
the
wants
end of
kids.
this, he does have faith. He trusts in God. He says, okay, I'll be patient. Maybe you got something coming to me. I don't know. Right? That's, more than he had coming into the conversation.
He also, the verse says that God took him outside. And somewhere there's a writing that says he took him outside of the physical universe or something like that. More outside than we usually
outside of the cosmos, the physical world. Yes.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, that very mystical commentary. I remember seeing something like that. I just don't remember what it was. But yeah, took him outside, meaning outside of physical experience.
There's also, interestingly enough, a almost parallel passage from the Greeks. And we use it, and I've used it in my classroom when we talk about the idea of the idea of the atom and the smallness and the multitude and the things of grains of the sand. And supposedly the Greek philosopher looked up, he saw the stars and the sands, and therefore he believed that matter was composed of some smaller units as opposed to the 4 elements that the Greeks had.
Atoms?
But it's a very similar passage to this idea of looking at the stars and the heavens and looking at the multitudes.
Mm-hmm.
There's a poet called Blake who said to see the universe in a grain of sand and eternity in an hour.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So I want to take a look with you tonight at how the Jewish commentators looked at this piece. Now, obviously, they looked at it very differently from Eerdman's Concise Bible Handbook, but it's there are a number of possibilities. So here is Rashbam. Rashbam looks at the last verse and says, Abraham took it as charitable of him, generous of him, giving him something he did not deserve by his own merit. In other words, it's like God is offering him something that's almost miraculous. And Rashbam is saying, I would have wanted that. I just didn't expect it anymore.
Who's
You're
Rashbam?
going to do a miracle for me? I don't deserve a miracle. But God is going to do it anyway. And he believes it. And therefore, God reckons it to his merit.
Who's Rashbam? What does Rashbam stand for?
Rashbam, Shmuel ben Meir, he is the grandson of Rashi. Okay? So that puts him, at late 11th, early 12th century France. May also have lived in Germany for a time too. Rashi had 3 daughters, and one of them married Meir. And this is the son of that union, Shmuel ben Meir. Okay?
Thank you.
All right. Next, say modern, if not contemporary commentary. Right? It says Avram is reassured by God's answer to his timid protest. He trusts God, who replies, I shall remember this. And he adds, the verse has no relation to the Christian dogma of justification by faith. So part of Benno Jacob's commentary is kind of a response to European Christian thought in that time about the Hebrew Bible. It says, righteousness is a claim to recognition and reward earned by his conduct. God leaves neither goodwill nor thought unrewarded. Okay? So, in other words, take that, Eerdmans. Okay? That this has nothing to do with justification by faith. All right. Next. Okay. So another contemporary commentary, this one by a fellow named Gerald Siegel, who I had vaguely heard of before I was preparing material for this. He's written a number of books kind of debunking Christian myths about the Hebrew Bible. And this is what he says about this piece. It says, did God demand of Abraham and his descendants faith alone without actual deeds?
Bless you.
Thank you. God himself declares, and this is in next week's Torah reading, for I have known him to the end that he may command his children and his household after him, that they may keep the way of the Lord to do righteousness and justice, to the end that the Lord may bring upon Abraham that which he has spoken of him. In other words, whatever God will command in the way of works, the children of Abraham will do. That's kind of iffy these days, but okay. As such, once the Torah was formally given to Abraham's descendants on Mount Sinai, it became binding upon every generation of Israelites. Paul, as in Saint Paul, certainly had no right or justification to abrogate the law. In the last analysis, what was actually demanded of Abraham and serves as an example for his descendants was a balance of faith and deeds. Abraham's faith was reflected by means of positive deeds. Now, this idea of a balance of faith and deeds, I think in practice and in theory, it can be problematic, and here's what I mean by that. Sometimes faith comes much harder for some people. We've probably all known people who have a very straightforward, unquestioning faith in God, and they understand why people doubt God, but they don't. It's not whatever problems there are, they're not problems for them. For them, faith is relatively easy. Other people, I think a lot of people just struggle tremendously to find faith. And if you're always struggling just to find faith, then what are the things that you do specifically because of your faith? Right? I mean, sure, there are plenty of people who are not, strictly speaking, believers, but who live good lives and do great things and make a wonderful difference in the world. But it's not a balance of faith and deeds. So for people who struggle to have faith, I think that's just incredibly difficult, because when you have to work so hard for faith, having a balance with that is very, very difficult. Yeah, Ann.
I don't know if I should ask a personal question.
Well, are you asking me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. I'll let you do it this time only.
How is it with you? Is faith hard?
I would say I'm somewhere in the middle. I think I'm normal, like most people, in that I have doubts, and I have had doubts. I'm one of those people who believes that doubt is not a bad thing. If you ask questions about things, that's usually a good sign. Right? It's a sign that you're not being naive. Right? Did I have to struggle with it like some people have to struggle with it? Not necessarily. I was, not always, but usually satisfied with the answers about religion that I got from my teachers. And that was probably true from the time I was very small, right through my doctoral program. So that's me, Ann.
Well, that
So
faith in your instructors that they're telling you the truth.
Well, I felt that most of the answers they gave me were reasonable ones. And when they weren't, I said, well, I can live without that answer. I can still have faith without that answer.
so God is real to you?
Yeah. Yeah, but maybe not as real as, in a physical sense as some people seem to believe. Because when you say God is real to me, is God a reality in my experience? Yes. Is God somebody who talks to me and guides me and tells me what to do when I get up in the morning? Not really. Not like that. Right? I'll share with you a couple of other thoughts on this. I think for a lot of us, faith is incomplete, but because we're human beings, you can never have complete faith. Okay? Dennis Prager had a very good line about this. He said, Judaism answers 80% of all questions that anyone interested in religion would possibly ask. I trust God for the other 20%. And I think that's right. You have to have a certain amount of trust that when you've got to a certain point And you can say, I know that I can't know that everything about Judaism is right, but I see so much of it that is right that I trust for the rest of it. And I found that very helpful. I just, I don't know. I'm a little suspicious of people who think they have all the answers about religion. And I think that's a good way to be suspicious of that. Because the next thing you know, they're going to sell you something. You may not want it. Yes, Ann.
The word religion. It comes from a Latin word that meant a ritual that is effective, as distinguished from other rituals that don't work. They call that superstition. Christianity adopted the word religion because they had a surefire way to get into heaven.
Yes. Well,
and we
interestingly,
for having
Anne,
but we don't.
In Hebrew, there isn't really such a word.
No, we don't have a religion. We just have a way of serving.
In Hebrew, the term that is most often used is dot, right?
Dot as in knowledge?
No, daled tough.
Oh.
Right? So, for instance, if, in Israel, where the lines tend to be either or, either you are chiloni, which is taken to mean secular, or dati, which means you're observant. You're basically Orthodox.
What does it literally mean?
I'm sorry?
What's the literal meaning?
Well, dot, I don't know exactly what the terminology comes from.
Oh, okay.
I can, now that I have my library here, I can actually look it up.
Oh, I didn't mean to bother you with
So, happens to be that the 4-volume Evan Shoshan dictionary is really good about giving you a little bit of etymology and a lot of history. Okay, let's see. Deshin, dot. Okay. So the first definition he gives for dot is emunah, faith.
Oh.
Okay. He gives religia. Very helpful. And it apparently dates to the Talmudic period, although there are other uses of it. So sometimes dot is taken to mean a law, okay? So in the book of Esther, it's used that way. It says, Lihinaten dot b'chom medina medinat, so that the law was given out to every province, okay? And kol yodei dat vadin, all who know the law and judgment, okay? But really, it took on the meaning of a particular kind of faith. So that's, thank you, Dr. Evan Shoshan. Right? But that's, and I think emunah is a good term for it. It's a faith. It's not a ritual per se. Judaism is not a set of things you do and you get a certain outcome, right? Like Shabbat candles and out comes a lollipop. Right? That is not the way it works in my experience. Your mileage may vary. But again, that balance of faith and deeds can be difficult for many people. Okay, the next thing I wanted to show you is that there are different translations of this last verse. So here is the New Jewish Version, and because he put his trust in the Lord, he reckoned it to his merit. Everett Fox, who is a contemporary who has done a translation of the entire Tanakh, said, now he trusted in the Lord and he deemed it as righteous merit on his part. Okay? Richard Friedman, contemporary commentator, scholar, who we had at Beth Yeshurun a few years back, said, and he trusted in the Lord and he considered it for him as virtue. Okay? Now, what's different here?
Rabbi,
Yes, Dale.
in the Everett Fox,
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
I say in the Everett Fox version,
Yes?
he is not God.
Yes. It's like he's saying, oh, this is Abraham. Abraham says, I guess that what I'm doing is the right thing, and hopefully God will reward me for it. And maybe I'll have a son. Okay?
But in the other two translations, that he is God.
Yes. Yes. And we'll come to Richard Friedman and his comments on that in a little bit. Okay, yes, Ann.
I have here Robert Alter. He says, he reckoned it to his merit.
Yeah, so basically not different really from Friedman.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm glad you had that because I was looking for Alter and I don't have his whole translation. Somewhere I have his Genesis translation. But I don't know if that was published years ago. He may have changed it. Anyway, so yeah, here's a serious question. Who's the he? Who's the subject of that last part?
It could be Abraham thinks that God is righteous or meritorious. To go all the way with it.
Or he simply says, I guess I must be doing the right thing. So I'm going to keep on trusting. All right, let's see some more. Okay. Here is Sforno's commentary. Here's what he says. Abraham believed without a doubt that God would do as he said, even though it was highly improbable according to the laws of nature. Obviously, having a child when both you and your wife are really old, not too likely. He deemed it as righteous merit on his part. God, the Blessed One, reckoned this trust in him as righteousness and to the merit of Abraham. Okay. So, Sforno's in the camp that says it is God who reckons the trust as righteousness.
Oh, well, look at Gersonides.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Gersonides says Avram took it as righteousness on God's part, because in fact, he knew he had earned the right to be under the care of divine providence. Now, that's pretty radical to say that this humble Avram, who has done everything that God has asked of him so far, and God has been asking a lot of things of him, right? Starting with Lech Lecha, starting with, go forth from your father's land, your homeland. Like, he says, I believe that God counts this as correct, and God is being fair, because after all that I've done, and as faithful as I've been to God, God should do this for me.
He'd better.
So
Well,
if God doesn't do it for him, then God isn't keeping God's promise.
yes. But even without the promise, Avram's saying, this is, I've earned this. This is what I deserve. Now, I don't know too many people who will say, I deserve a miracle.
Man has chutzpah.
Man has chutzpah. So you got to give him credit for that. All the different tests that Abraham goes through. And maybe the biggest test is having enough chutzpah to think about whether God is being righteous. All right, comments or questions here?
Well, I can see where we're a stiff-necked people.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Gersonides must be.
Well, Gersonides isn't, in this case, he's not necessarily passing judgment on Avram's chutzpah.
No, he's not. He's
He's
approving
saying
of it.
that Avram knows this. Avram's, he has a relationship with God. He's followed God. He's done everything God wanted him to do. And so fair is fair.
Well, isn't that pretty chutzpahdik on Gersonides' part?
No, I think it's just his read of the text.
Okay.
I don't think Gersonides is necessarily saying, I'm righteous. I don't know if Gersonides had that kind of opinion of himself.
No, but he's saying our ancient father who started all this, we come from good folks.
Yes. Okay. And faithful folks. And so faithful that he was very confident that God would do this. And by the way, just, look at Bechor Shor in the next text. Very similar. Avram deemed it as righteous on God's part, for God had dealt with him righteously, and God promised that an inheritor of the land would spring from his loins. Meaning that, God doesn't mess up on his promises. And if it just takes a while, okay, so I'm an old man. God says I'm going to have a child. Then that's the right thing. And, notwithstanding the fact that a few verses in the text before, Avram had said, I don't have a child yet. In case you hadn't noticed, God, my servant is going to inherit everything I own. But that seems to be okay, because in the end, Avram says, God is going to do right. And God is going to give me a child, and God is going to take care of my family.
Isn't Richard
And,
Friedman
and
the one that
if God hadn't done all those things, we would say that Avram was really chutzpah. But it's only because God did them that we say, okay, that's confidence. That's not chutzpah, it's confidence. Right?
Well, if God didn't keep his part of the bargain and make Abraham be able to parent some children, we wouldn't be here.
I'm not convinced of that. After all, the Jewish people are very stubborn. We would have found a way to come into existence if it hadn't been through Abraham, would have been through somebody else.
Yeah, but the Jewish people would be different because our forefather would be different.
Okay, maybe so, but how different would we be if we wound up getting the same Torah?
that's interesting. If another soul in another body could have still produced somebody who would become the ancestors of whoever stood at Mount Sinai.
Right.
Well, from my way of looking at things, it wouldn't matter whether it was Abraham or it was Billy Bob.
Right.
The end result.
Yeah, Billy Bob would have definitely a Southern flavor to the Jewish people. But aside from that, yeah, I absolutely. It doesn't matter. And, in that sense, I will go really radical here. In that sense, Abraham is a mythical figure. Now, by mythical, I don't mean to say that he didn't exist. I mean, he has a certain mythical quality to him as a character, right? And in that sense, it wouldn't really matter whether Abraham was a historical reality or not.
Maybe not, but Mama Sarah had to be there.
You were right to throw out her son's half brother.
Well, among other things, yeah.
Among other things, yes. But see that, and for me, I'm willing to say that Abraham was probably a historical person, but I'm also willing to say that if he hadn't been, in the end, it really doesn't matter. Because Judaism is what it is because it begins with certain things, with certain presumptions, with the presumption of an Abraham. And that presumption, not just the person Abraham, but the presumption about all the qualities of that person and the history of that person is what makes the Jews. Or, certainly what sets us on the road to being the Jews.
Well, as I see it, if our foreparents weren't Abraham and Sarah, it would just be changing a few names in the Torah, and the result would be the same.
Right. Somebody got this idea started. Personally, I like praying to the, Elohei Avraham, Elohei Yitzchak, Elohei Sarah. Elohei Fred, just, doesn't do it for me. But yeah, I really do believe that in the end, it doesn't matter so much which one it is. So last piece here, this is from Richard Friedman. It says, in essence, what he's going to say here is that it's not about what Abraham says right now. He says, we're not told why God chose Abraham. We must derive it from Abraham's later behavior, his virtue, his combination of obedience and willingness to question. We'll see that later. Humility as well as boldness, trust in his God as well as caring about his fellow human beings. Right? But all that, or most of that at least, comes later, which is why I think it's fair to say God chose Abraham for his potential and not just because he figured Abraham would be willing to follow faithfully. Yes, Ann.
Isn't Richard Friedman the one that was here a year or so ago?
Yeah, that's what I mentioned. He was
I
asked at
asked him
Yeshurun as
at
a
that
scholar in
time.
Moses.
I asked him at that time if he thought Abraham was a real person, and he said he didn't. But he said he does believe that the Levites, at least, did come out of Egypt. There was an Exodus.
Mm-hmm.
He's written a whole book about how
Mhm.
there was an Exodus.
Yes. And Friedman probably also believes that the stories of the book of Genesis are myth, but that they contain lessons which, in fact, were the lessons that birthed the Jewish people. I don't know if I would go that far, but even if I was faced with proof of that, I think I would still say, okay, so maybe it was Fred, right? Or it was some combination of people with the kind of resilience and commitment that is described of Abraham.
Well, as I see it, Abraham volunteered first before God chose him.
And what do you base that on, Del?
Well, Abraham had to choose God, or there would have been no faith.
There's Midrashim, lots of them.
Well, yeah, there are midrashim that suggest that Abraham chose God long before God appeared to him and said, Lech Lecha, get going. Right?
Well, we have the Midrashim.
Ultimately, and I think, those midrashim were set up to answer some of the questions in the text, like, why did God pick Abraham? Right? But that's the question. Did God pick Abraham because Abraham chose God, or because he saw the potential in Abraham for the kinds of behavior that he shows through these chapters?
Barbara had something I would like to hear.
Yeah, please, Barbara.
Well, in the Midrashim, we see Abram set up as a child in his father's idol shop,
Right.
destroying the idols. It is, and remembering that most of this is written later as an attempt to explain what's going on in the very beginning. And it is possible that some of Genesis, at least, is a myth, and that these characters are composites of characteristics that feed the birth of Judaism and the birth of the religions.
Yes. It's possible. It's very possible.
Lots of possibilities.
So, if somebody were to come to me and say, Rabbi, I believe that Abraham was real, that he was exactly what the Torah says. So I don't think it's my business to say to him, well, you're wrong, or I don't think so, or, well, a lot of scholars say different. I would just say,
Oh,
no, that works. And it worked for a lot of our ancestors too,
and a lot of our contemporaries.
and for many of our contemporaries. Does one have to believe it? No, I don't think so.
But it gives everybody something to hang their hat on and makes a story that it can be, that you can hold it if you like, hold in your hand or talk about. It's a history.
Yes.
Somebody had to come from Mesopotamia to the promised land. Might as well call him Abraham.
Well, in reality, I don't think that's necessarily true. I don't think, the first Jew could have come from anywhere or nowhere.
But he tells a lot of the same stories that were told in Mesopotamia. I mean,
Well, because, so that tells you something about the origins of the text of the Torah that we have, right?
and the
Same
Hittites.
thing with the story of the flood, right?
Yeah, that's the one.
Yeah.
That's a big one.
Mhm.
Rabbi, does the name Abram or Abraham have a translation?
So Av means father, okay? Av Ram means exalted. So Avram literally means exalted father, right? But when you add the hey to it, it has the connotation of a group, a large group, and therefore, Avraham is like Avhamon Goyim, Avraham, the father of many nations or many peoples.
So therefore, it is possible that the concept of Abraham is, that's where the name is coming from, that they're deriving the name from the concept of the father or the beginning of all of the nations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so, yes, there may have been a person who knows what his name was, but that we're talking about a concept as opposed to a real, honest to God person with that name.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to rule that out, but yeah, it's certainly possible. So I want to say a couple of words here at the end about going back to the verse here.
Mm.
It says Ve'emin Bashem, and he put his trust in God. He'emin, right? So he'emin is a very interesting word, right? You know the song Ani Ma'amin, I believe, right?
Emuna.
Emunah, faith, right? So laha'amin means to confirm, to have trust in. Doesn't always mean emunah. Doesn't mean faith in the sense of we're affirming a certain proposition about God, right? So maybe, and this is the idea I think I want to leave you with, more important than God having a certain, than Abraham having a certain conception of God. He has a relationship with God. He trusts in God. He shows God that he is trustworthy. that's a kind of relationship that, you can start to build a religion on. And now, trustworthiness is a step towards righteousness, right? So, you can have great ideas about God, but those only work if you act on them, right? So Abraham has these righteous thoughts, righteous principles, a right belief in God, and he carries them forward through righteous conduct. Right? And Friedman's comment back, we saw this at the end. This is a way of saying that Abraham's trust isn't as much about having faith in God or a particular conception of God as it is in how he behaves. Right? And when you look at all, this talks about all of his qualities. Right? So those are the qualities of a person you would regard as trustworthy. Right? And that's, so in a way, when we pray and we say in the Amidah, praised are you, God, Magen Avraham, shield of Abraham. What we're in effect saying is that we believe, God, that by and large, maybe there are exceptions, but by and large, you will reward righteousness as you did for Abraham. That's something worthwhile to think about when we daven. Any comments or questions before we close up?
So I have a couple.
Yeah, Dale.
First off, at the end of chapter 14, that's when Abraham has just returned from war.
Yes.
And
What?
Going off to war is enough to convince somebody that they may not survive forever. And thus, you have the concern, am I going to have children?
Yes. So, yes, he believes in God because he's been in the foxhole, right? But you want to live for something worthwhile after that. When you come home from war, you want family.
And then the other thing I've got, right at the end of chapter 15, God tells Abraham the boundaries of the land. We're going to go from the great river in Egypt to the Euphrates.
Hmm.
Well, a few generations later, the borders changed.
Yes. Yeah, it didn't exactly happen like that. Now, it is true that in the time of King Solomon, the borders of the land were much bigger. But I don't know if they went all the way to the Euphrates. That sounds pretty far-fetched.
And did they reach all the way into Egypt?
Maybe
Well,
a little bit.
Yeah, the Nile would have encompassed eventually. The Sinai Peninsula is in the middle of it.
No. Sinai is, the Nile is definitely west of Sinai.
Yeah.
Right. But it's not that far west of the Sinai. There's
I don't
the,
know where Sinai was.
Well, I
mean, the mountain, maybe the wilderness.
We're talking about the peninsula.
we're talking about the Sinai Peninsula.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Okay. Other questions, Dale?
No, that was it.
All right.
Thank you.
Y'all have a Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat
And
shalom.
Good Shabbos, everybody.
Yep.
Rabbi.
Shabbos.
Thank
Yep.
you.
be well. Thank you,
Thank-
Ashley.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Ashley.
Ashley.
Thank you, Rabbi.
See y'all next week.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. Be well.
Thank you.